Suffering arises when we want to be other than where we are. And we want to be other than where we are because of our mind. The mind judges, the mind desires. The mind looks at our life and says, I want this and I don't want that. And there's nothing wrong with the mind. But if we allow it to rule over us, then we can spend our whole lives suffering. Because how often does life happen exactly the way we want it to? Not that often. But what if life was always the way you want it? Because you learn to accept everything as it is and can enjoy in the present moment. One thing I still struggle with sometimes is really wanting things to be a certain way. But it seems the same message I always return to, and that is, just stop. Stop trying to make things a certain way. Stop wanting things to be other than what they are. Just give it all up. And because I've always had a strong mind, there's always been a lot of resistance to that. Because the more one is identified with their mind, the more surrender means death. And we are attached to certain things in this life. Certain things that we like, our stories and our patterns. And so I guess it's just not an overnight thing in which we surrender everything. But what I found is that the more you get in touch with the joy of being, the more you suffer when something takes you away from that. And so you can begin feeling that contrast. And when you experience that pain, it becomes less and less likely that you do things to take you away from it. And so over time, you simply recondition your mind to always want to stay present. However, what if we are already in suffering? What if we have lost our presence and are caught in the mind? What to do then? Well, it comes down simply to becoming aware. Because when we are suffering, it means we have fallen into unconsciousness, unconscious reactions, unconscious behavior. And it is awareness that is the cure for unconsciousness. So when we see that we are suffering, when we feel that, we can recognize and remember. And there is just one thing that we have to remember. If we get caught in trying to think about all these different ideas and spiritual teachings, then it's easy to get lost and forget. Because when we're suffering, the only thing that we can think about is our own suffering. But if you've ever read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, you probably know that the thing we have to remember is that any tension, any resistance, any suffering is a sign that we've lost the present moment. And so all we have to remember is to return back here and now. Sometimes we have to take a few deep breaths. One of the best things we can do is go outside and move around, get some sunlight, do some exercise, go out in nature. Anything we can do to get into a flow state. And oftentimes, if we are so caught up in the mind, it's because there's a lot of excess energy. And so, by moving the body, we can release that energy and again once find our peace. But the more we sit around and ruminate on our thoughts, on the story that we're in, on our life circumstances, the more this negativity festers within us. And we continue to perpetuate that negativity. Because when we get comfortable complaining or focusing on the negative, we train our bodies, we train our mind to reinforce that behavior. But if we reinforce the behavior of being present and letting go of the stories and the thoughts, then it becomes easier and easier to get back into peace. Remember, the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So if it's not focused on whatever negative life situation, then we do not experience that. We only experience things that we focus our attention on. which is why there is no use in focusing on negativity, on problems and difficulties. Because why would we consciously choose to focus on something we don't want to experience? And it's not even about the life situation itself. It's not exactly about the problem, but it's about our reaction, our attitude toward it. It's not always about what we do, but how we do it, how we engage in any particular thing. Because one person can go mop the floor and be super angry and irritated and hate their life, and so that is what they experience. And another person can go and mop the floor and be perfectly at peace because they are completely focused on what is in front of them. And so their energy is not being stolen by negativity, and so they can remain in touch with the joy of being. And I think this is one of the most difficult things for the mind to really grasp, and that is, there's really nothing that can be done. Its battle is futile because we are already at the finish line. There is no journey and there is no path to get something, to win. We were already born winners. And yet the mind constantly takes our attention and says, no, we need this, or we don't want that. And it's this getting whipped back and forth that I think creates a lot of the suffering. But it's in that presence, the stillness, in which joy emerges and peace. Which is why quieting the mind is of such importance. Like it's been said, if there are ripples in the water, the reflection of the sun cannot be seen. But when the water is still, you can see the light clearly. And so it is only when we engage in actions that create ripples in the waters of the mind do we become separated from this light and from the joy of being. And we become separated, or we create ripples through our attachments, because we take this consciousness that we are and we attach it to a mind pattern, and that pattern takes us all over the place. And then only until we get sick of that do we realize, oh, wait a minute, I've been attached. And we can kind of let go of whatever it is that's causing us trouble. But there's a lot of inner resistance that keeps us from really surrendering. Because, as I'm sure you know, if you really want something, you can't just not want it. And if you really don't want something, you can't suddenly say, oh, well, this is okay. Attachments are attachments because we don't want to let them go. So sometimes we have to bulldoze ourselves through this inner resistance at first. Sometimes we have to force ourselves to get outside and move around. That is where it seems that discipline, or perhaps just even awareness, comes into play. Because if we are deeply suffering, or annoyed, or irritated, we may want to sit in that irritation. There may be a part of us that wants to stay mad or stay irritated. But if we can be aware of the solution to that, which is release the excess energy, go out and move the body, then we can kind of force ourselves to move, to nudge ourselves in the right direction. And so whenever suffering is experienced, we can just nudge ourselves back into the present moment. And there are many vehicles for this. Like I said, movement. You can go and meditate, follow the breath. The most important thing is that we have just lost touch with our inner being temporarily. The water has become rippled, and so it takes a bit of time to settle back down. And so it's good for us to recognize what are the things that trigger us, what are the things that ripple the mind. And the more we become aware of the things that separate us from the present moment, it becomes easier to let them go. All of the addictions, all of the stories, and the thoughts. Because you can get so in touch with this joy that you would never want to do anything that takes you away from it. things that you might have enjoyed in the past become uninteresting. And sure, it may take some time because we still have a bit of attachment, but the more we become in tune with this consciousness that we are, this awareness, when we remain as the non-attached observer, we automatically become separated from all the different things, from attachments. And so a bit of space is created. And that space protects us from getting pulled in all these different directions. And one by one, it seems that our latent attachments begin to arise. And in the world, we have these opportunities to let them go. So it's like a process of getting triggered and letting go. Recognizing where we are attached and remaining as the observer. And it's really as simple as developing the habit. And if you think about it, we've all spent our whole lives habitually reacting to the mind, to our life circumstances, getting pulled in all of these different directions. And so it does take some time to reverse that habit, to not react, to remain in the present moment. But there's a certain momentum that is created over time. With consistency, we can more quickly solidify ourselves in the state. If there is suffering, see if you can allow it to be as it is, because it is the tension and the resistance to that suffering that adds on to it. This is quite difficult just living our daily lives, so often we need to take some time alone for ourselves, to find a place of stillness and silence. Because when you're sitting alone, it is a lot easier to observe and see all the thoughts, see all the negative feelings. But when we're going through our daily lives, our attention is easily scattered. And so we have less power. And the less power we have, the more easily things have power over us. And so you see, this is a game of retaining our power, valuing our energy. Because a thought only has power over us from the power that we give it. It in itself has no power. Same thing with our beliefs and our attitudes and our identity. All of the attachments that we have only exist because of the power that we feed them. And so as we take that power back, these things lose their power and die. Because they feed off our power to have power and control over us. They use our own power against us. They steal our life force. And so the more energy, the more life that we retain, the less energy leakages that we allow, the more joy, peace, and love that we experience. Because that is the radiance of life. That is the essence of God.